are awesome weapons, but they're also very fragile, and it's our responsibility as temporary owners to don't get damaged. I'm going to go quickly because I'm going to be out of here in 5 minutes, so 10. I'll take questions when I'm done if there's time left. If you have a pertinent question while I'm talking, by all means. When you're carrying a Japanese sword, always make sure that the handle is higher than the scabbard. Otherwise, you can fall. When you have a Japanese sword, if the sword is not out of the koshirai, if it's not a bare blade, make sure that the pin is through the hole in the handle and the hole in the makumi. Without the pin, if I were to do this, there's nothing holding the blade in the handle. The blade can go charging down inside the scabbard and shatter its point at the bottom. This pin is very important. It's always a good idea to have a sword bag on, because without the sword bag, if the fit of the habaki isn't tight, the habaki being the collar in here that forms a tight fit in the mouth, or if the humidity changes and the scabbard expands a little bit, if you're not careful, it can fall out. The bag also keeps it clean. Before I get into the rest of the normal etiquette, I want to show you a neat little trick. Very often, you'll find a scabbard that's starting to split at the mouth. That's very common, or maybe even all the way down. And you'll see swords in the showroom, people wrap tape around it. And that just discolors the scabbard, and if it's a lacquered scabbard, the tape, when you take it off, pulls off the lacquer sometimes. This is a really cool trick. You start about here. If you want it to end up there, you start about here, because the saya of the scabbard gets larger as you approach the handle. You wrap a piece of clean paper around it tight, and then you wrap some masking tape around the paper, and it's not very tight there, but you slide it up. It makes a very nice tight band around the scabbard, but it's reversible, and it will not discolor the scabbard. So, passing a Japanese sword when it isn't mounted, or when it is mounted, when it's in the mounts, passing it from one person to another. Can you stand up, please? To pass a blade in the mounts, you hold the blade in two hands, horizontal, with the cutting edge towards yourself. Cutting edge towards yourself is universal in passing a blade. It's good manners, and it's also common sense. You're responsible for the pass. If somebody's going to get cut, it's you. You accept it with both hands, and you nod your head or you let me know you've got it. And then you pass it back to me. Perfect. No problem. Hold on. When you take the sword out of the scabbard, the cutting edge is always towards the ceiling. You do not take the sword out of the scabbard on its side or on its edge, because doing this, you're cutting the scabbard and dulling the blade. It's riding on the back when you made this way. If it's shirasaya, there's no tsuba. Break the seal by placing your hands on either side of the joint and squeeze it. Don't just go like here and try to pull, because some of the habaki form a very tight fit, and you'll end up jerking it out. And in that middle of that jerk, you can be chipping the cutting edge. If it has a tsuba, you're going to have to do something like this. Go easy for the first inch. Pull it out in a continuous smooth motion. Do not stop halfway in and out. You'll see people doing this at the sword show. Bad manners. You can chip the cutting edge, you can scratch the sword, you can damage the saya. To pass a blade with just the suka, you hold it at the bottom of the handle, the suka, securely, with the cutting edge facing yourself, blade's vertical. You grab the blade above my hand, let me know you've got it, and then you can pass it back to me. Pay attention to what's above you. I've seen swords stuck into ceilings. It's very easy to break them aside. To take the blade out of the suka, you have to remove the makumi. And there's a variety of ways of doing that. A lot of us at sword shows carry Makugi and feet on a string. You've seen the brass ones with hammers. I like to do the Makugi, the martial art, with the knuckle. That won't do any damage, other than to your knuckle. If you're using something mechanical and we're dealing with even sheer side, be careful. You have to decide which is the smaller end of the Makugi and you push it. You can reverse this if you're left-handed. I'm right-handed, so here's how I do it. You hold the suka at the bottom. You don't want to hold it at the top because you're squeezing it and you're working against yourself. Hold it at the bottom in your left hand with the blade angled back over your right shoulder. Pay attention to what's up there. And with the fist of your right hand, you tap. Now, every sword is different and every time of year is different because of changing humidity. So your first tap is a light one because some swords are very loose. If you hit it really hard, the blade will go flying. Really loose. And you increase the pressure, the force, until you start walking the sword out of the hand. And when you get to this point where it's loose and you can get behind the habaki and grab it, you do so. Now, if you try that and you find that it's still really hard to do, go back and tap your hand again. Get it a little bit looser. You don't want to push really hard on the habaki because that will force the habaki up on the blade and it can chip the blade right at the notch. If the blade is mounted with the suba, you don't want to be pushing on the suba because that can do the same thing. It forces the habaki. If it's a small blade, a tanto, it can have a very short nakigo. You have to be very careful that you don't go too far because it can fall. To pass a blade that has no mounts, once again, hold it at the bottom of the nakigo. You let me know you've got it, and then you return it to me. You never touch the polished portion of the blade. It's okay to touch the corroded portion of the nakigo, but never the polish. There's acid and the moisture in your fingers, and if you touch it and you don't clean it, you will have a fingerprint on your blade. Polishes are very expensive if they're done properly, and very, very fragile things. You'll see people in the sword room touching because the blades aren't in polish. You'll see Japanese dealers doing it. You'll see silverbacks doing it. I can't stop everybody from doing silly things. It's bad manners to touch the polished portion. It's disrespectful to touch the polished portion of the Japanese sword. And I'm kind of a hard case about this. I wish everybody was. Here's where you handle a bare Japanese sword. When you look at a sword pointed at the light, pay attention to what's around you, especially in a sword show where there's so many people. Don't be going like this. Watch what's up above you. Flip the sword back together. If it had suba and seppa, you would place those back on the blade. When I take a mounted sword apart, when I take the suba and the seppa off, I always set them down right side up, so that when I put them back on, I pick them up and I know which way they fit. Because often the seppa are such nice tight fit that if it fits this way, it won't fit that way. I slide them back on, and then you grab the suka, and of course the habaki has to go back on if you've taken the habaki off. Holding the blade vertically, you lower it in. With the suka grasped in my left hand, I then tap on the bottom of the suka with my right hand until I hear it seat. You can also look through the hole of the makugi on it. Place your makugi back in. Then put the sword back in place. I'm starting with the saya, the scabbard angled downward, the blade angled upward. I rest the very end of the mune, back of the sword in the mouth of the saya. I bring them in, you can feel when they mate. And then you slide it in one smooth, continuous motion, not stopping halfway. If the sword is in polish, you have to be careful if you're talking while you're looking at it, that you don't spit. If the sword's in polish, it's not a good idea to talk over it. And if it's a sword of mine that's in polish and I'm talking to somebody while I'm looking at it, I will do this. I will hold it here and talk like this, just so I'm really careful not to spit on it. Taking care of a sword, if it's in polish, is done there's a variety of ways of doing this, and as near as I can tell, there isn't an absolute proper, absolute right way to do it. There's varieties. Especially when it's so which you can have moisture, it's a good idea to go down the room if you put something on it. White, unscented facial tissue, Kleenex. It's perfectly. You can use toilet paper, as long as it isn't made from recycled fibers. Recycled paper can have stray foreign fibers in it that can scratch the polish. But as long as it's tinted or just plain soft white paper, pressure paper. To put the oil on, put just a couple, 3 drops of the clove oil in the paper. And you would do this without any of the mounts. You have the handle, and as you'll know what I'm talking about, I don't. The oil onto the blade in a nice continuous motion. I should take this apart just to show you this point. Starting about an inch above the nakago, wipe it on, and then from that inch down to the nakago. If you start at the nakago and then go up, you can be dragging little pieces of rust across your polish and scratching the polish. Once you've put it on, these 2-3 drops, then take a clean, dry piece of tissue and wipe it off. And what remains on the sword is the amount of oil you want to have on it. It's a very, very thin coat. If you put too much oil on the sword and the sword gets stabbed like this, inside its scabbard, the oil will run down the blade and pool in the bottom of the side, and that'll look cracked and keep dust and dirt from the dirty side. To remove the oil, you can first start out by taking a piece of clean tissue and wiping off the oil that's apparent, the most of it. And then you use Uchiko. Uchiko is a very, very finely powdered limestone that is a byproduct of the polishing process. And there's different grades of Uchiko. This is a garden variety, inexpensive Uchiko puff. Back when I bought off between $5 and $10, I don't know what they go for now. If you have a sword that's in polish, this is a polisher's Uchiko. I bought this from Bob Benson, who was a classically trained polisher. And he sells these for $30, $35. That's a puff that's going to last you your lifetime. It's a very wise investment. I have 2 different grades because this sword is not in polish. This Uchiko puff is only for blades that are in polish. And I would not use it on a blade that isn't in polish because I don't want to take the chance of getting a rust particle from this and transferring it to one of my blades in polish. So, to do the Uchiko, if your blade's in polish, this is important. Don't hit the puff. And here's, you see guys doing this? Here's a better idea. Hitting the back of the blade, the mone. You see I'm depositing powder on the blade, even though I'm not hitting the side of the blade. Especially if it's a less expensive Uchiko puff, there can be coarser particles in here. And by doing it this way, it's more likely that the coarse particles will fly past. And then, once again, with a clean piece of tissue, starting an inch above, like that, once or twice, and then down and towards the nagico. Don't go to the spot you think needs a little bit more. Uchiko isn't abrasive, and if you do it too much, you can change the sheen of the polish, and you'll make a spot that's noticeable. You don't want to be doing Uchiko every day. Some people take the old oil off with acetone because Uchiko can abrade the polish. Slowly but surely it'll make a difference if you do it too much. A friend who had a very important question, he doesn't use Uchiko, he uses acetone. You're going to find what works for you through trial and error. If you get a sword that's in polish, get good advice. Don't have a sword polished by somebody who isn't classically trained, and that includes everybody in this room. Don't polish your own swords. There's so many guys in that room over there who are sword polishers. To become a registered swordsmith, Japanese swordsmith in Japan, is an 8-year apprenticeship. To become a registered polisher in Japan is a 10-year apprenticeship. You cannot learn how to polish Japanese swords by reading a book or video. And amateur polishes damage swords. It's not just making it shiny. You have to know what the proper shape is. You have to know what the proper color of the steel is. If the sword is unsigned, you have to know where and when it was made to know which type of polish, what the proper shape and color is. You have to know all these things to do a good job of polishing. Japanese sword is a finite object. The vast majority of them have a skin steel and a core steel. And the skin steel is what's beautiful to look at. The core steel is coarser, more impurities, has the openings, it's a different color. If the polisher leaves too much of the sword on the stones, he's polishing through the skin steel. We end up with a problem known as shintetsu, core steel. The sword is tired, it's severely damaged. Don't let amateurs polish your swords. You cannot save money on a Japanese sword polish. The most expensive ones cost the least. I know so many stories of guys with, well, I didn't want to spend $3,000 to have my longsword polished, so I found somebody to do it for $1,000. Well, guess what? This sword that's worth $20,000 with the proper polish is now worth $3,000 because it's tired. You did not save any money. I know of guys who sent a great sword to a mediocre polisher and said that when you're done, take it to the museum for papers. After the polish was done and paid for, the polisher takes it to the museum. Mr. Tanobe at the museum calls the collector here in the States and says, your sword is very good, we'll get a very good paper after it has a proper polish. He has to pay for 2 polishes. And the sword has to suffer through 2 polishes. I can't emphasize this more. Don't save money on polishes. We are responsible that these things are around for the next and future generations. And please do your part. In the sword show, it's good manners to ask before you look at the swords. You see everybody just walking up to the table and picking up. I always ask, and nobody ever complains that I'm asking. And I say, sure, of course. It's a nice thing to do. It's just common sense. There are some people who don't want you to pick them up without asking, and it's really rough to find out the hard way that you picked the wrong guy to try it on. If anybody can think of something else I need to cover, or if anybody has any questions, please.
If
Fits up against the side of the suka, and it's undercut so that it's bearing on the surface of the suka, and the habaki keeps this away from the blade, and then as I tap here, you can see that the blade is walking out. That's what you use if your sword is very tight in the suka. Anything else? Yes.
the swords on display, will they be